homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm, or welcome back. We are doing a very end of August, early September garden tour. I thought I'd show you some of the successes and failures of this year. Let's get started. So this garden contains 7 4x8 raised beds and then 1 round 5-foot stock tank as my beds here. We have really good soil, so I could plant in the ground, but the beauty of raised beds is there's so much less weeding. So I've been very happy with these, and I have a whole video on putting one of these metal raised beds together and a link to where I got it on Amazon. If you're interested in that, they are not terribly expensive. This stock tank is new this year, and I decided to fill it full of flowers. Some of these are perennial, some of them are annual. And then I've done some editing over the course of the summer. The front of this was calendula, and the calendula was pretty much done, and so I tore that out. And I had some thyme plants, a couple of them that I had started from seed, and a couple of them that I had bought from the store that I intended to put someplace else and never got that bed ready. And so those went in where the calendula was. This mess is a perennial chamomile that is pretty much done for the season, but I expect that to grow back. And draping off the side here are some sweet peas. We don't have great luck with sweet peas here. This is the annual sweet pea that smells so wonderful. They're not frost tolerant, and so if you plant them too early, they just either don't germinate or they die with a frost. And then as soon as you plant them after a frost, they get real hot, and so they aren't real happy. And so this has been in here quite a while, since May, and most of it has died. But there is one plant in here that is still hanging in there through the summer heat. And hopefully we'll get a few blooms off of this before it's done. I would love to tear all the dead stuff out, but everything's all entwined, and I'm afraid if I tear out some of it, I'll accidentally pull the one that's still alive. Yeah, so not great luck on that this year, but some beautiful results. Everything in here was started from seed, and so this is a bachelor button that I pruned back a couple of times, and I really expected it to look way rattier than it does. I kind of like the dried pink flowers in there. It's really quite pretty. And so I've got new ones still coming, and the old ones are faded. This will reseed, and it can be mildly invasive, so you have to watch it, but very pretty this year. I've got some Sahara Rudbeckia in here, and these have been deadheaded. And then new blooms are coming, and so I had some beautiful bouquets out of here with this and some Queen Anne's lace. And the Sahara Rudbeckia, there's a lot of variation within the flower, and so you can see the completely different shape of the one on the left versus the one on the right there. Some of them are almost more like a zinnia, and then you get quite a bit of color variation too, but they're just gorgeous. This blue is anise hyssop, which is an herb that you can use for tea, but it also is very great for pollinators. And so I pruned that back and dried quite a bit of it, but I left a lot of it to grow up for the bees and the butterflies as well. And that's a kind of a short-lived perennial in our climate. It will often come back for a couple of years, but then it often dies out. But it's in the mint family, and you can save seed from it, and it's quite easy to restart. And so I think I bought it once, 10 or 15 years ago, and at this point I just keep replanting it. But it is a pretty little thing. And then of course my floret zinnia seeds that I saved from a friend who had a whole bunch of them, and then started from seed this spring, and they have gotten very, very tall, mostly because, well, one, I've been pruning them and making bouquets like every week, but also simply because there's quite a bit of shade in here. We have a large black walnut tree here that I think is probably doubled in size this year. And it's not right over the garden, but it does give quite a bit of shade. And then there's another, this is the grandparent of the other black walnut, is back in this corner. And so this doesn't get a ton of direct sun. And then on this side, standing on the south end right now, this is an almond tree, and that also gives quite a bit of shade. And then along the fence line in the back there, you'll see that in a minute, I have hops. And so that also is shading things. But honestly, our summers get quite hot. And I think that probably actually, it makes things leggy, but I also think it actually saves things in the long run. Everything in here is on a drip system so that I don't have to stand here and water. And I cannot recommend enough putting in drip to your garden if you haven't already done that. It is such a lifesaver. So it's on a timer and it runs every day for a half an hour to an hour, which is probably overkill, but I would rather have too much than too little. On the end of this bed, I have more of these really pretty little painted daisies. And then down in the middle there, those are a couple of echinaceas, and they have just been basically that size all summer. I suspect that because we're really close to this walnut, walnuts put out a chemical that suppresses other plants, not all plants, but quite a few. And I suspect that that's what's going on there, is there's probably some residual black walnut happening there that's keeping those from growing, or it could just be shade. But this one on the end, for whatever reason, has been relatively unaffected and has done well. And then I did have potatoes at the end of this bed. I did dig the potatoes up just the other day, and we've had a couple of nice fresh potato dinners. I didn't grow a lot of potatoes this year, but that was a variety I wanted to keep going. And then on the end here, once the potatoes came out, this is a Swiss chard. And I didn't plant it in the spring because it tends to get really hammered by leaf miners. And then it struggles. It goes through the summer, but it's not great. And so I thought it would be better to start it in the summer and let it be a fall plant. So I'm hoping to get a nice crop of Swiss chard off of that. We'll see how it goes. And then the rest of this is herbs. So this is flatleaf parsley, which I love having around, and I will do some pesto with shortly. And then some marjoram in the middle there. And then to the left is za'atar, which I've trimmed a couple of times and dried, and it's ready for another trim. And that is a wild thyme that is, you can see, it's related to marjoram. You can see the similarity here. This is the marjoram, very, very fragrant, almost floral. And then here is the za'atar. The leaves are a little bit fuzzy, but you can see this is starting to flower in a very similar kind of flower shape to the marjoram. So they're in the same ballpark. Za'atar in our climate will sometimes overwinter, very tender perennial, but I generally treat it as an annual. So I'm not expecting this to overwinter, but we'll see. Tail end of some quinoa that I grew in here, and a lot of color variation in this. Seed for quinoa is usually a lot of mixed varieties because the genetics are really for high elevation Peru, cold climates. They're not really adapted to hot. And so they're doing a lot of mixing of different varieties and species, hoping that you get something that will work for your climate. And so I harvested quite a few that were way more tan than this. And then this one is not quite finished, but is a really pretty little golden color. And if you think to yourself, gosh, that looks a lot like lamb's quarter, it is the same genus, different species. So very, very closely related to lamb's quarter, and edible leaves as well. This one is ready to pull out. I have a bag in my greenhouse where I'm just clipping these off and throwing them in there, and I'll get to winnowing those sometime later. The rest of this bed was poppy, breadseed poppy, and those have been pulled out. And then I've planted, I threw a handful of mixed lettuce in here, and I'm surprised that it's done as well as it has. So I'm pleased that those are hanging in there even with the summer heat. We'll see how big they get before. I'm expecting it to cool down. We are still quite a bit warmer than we normally would be for this time of year. So hopefully these don't just bolt as they're itty bitties, and hopefully I'll get a nice fall crop of lettuce. And then I did have some dill in here as well, and the dill reseeded. And so I'm getting little baby dill plants coming up all over the place in here as well. And they're obviously an annual. They're not going to survive the winter, but I'm just going to let them grow. And right before we get a frost, I'll just clip everything and dry it. But it's kind of fun that there's just random dill coming up in here. And then I haven't figured out what to, there's nothing in this section right here. I think I might throw some spinach seed in there and see if I can get a fall crop of spinach. I got a really, really good crop of spinach this spring. And so I'm not dying for more spinach, but it's always lovely to have around. You can see this has got some compost in it. I've got old peach pits in here, from random compost. I have a worm bin, and that went into a worm bin and then went into here. And I actually had one sprout. I'll show you a picture of it overlaid here. So I grew a peach tree from a peach pit that came out of my worm bin this year, and it's doing surprisingly well. And then this little guy right here, this is borage. I also had some volunteer borage in here, and it just reseeds like gangbusters, and I do not need more borage at this point, so I'm just pulling those out. Here's a borage that reseeded. I pulled most of what I had out, but it's great for bees. I don't mind having a little bit of it, but I don't need a ton of it. This bed is green beans, and it was soybeans, but none of them germinated. Don't know what that was about. Just had zero germination on that. Might have been too warm. But 3 different varieties of green beans. I have Providence, Maxabel, and Jade. The Providence and the Maxabel were seed that I had saved, and the Jade was a new seed pack. The Jade had terrible germination, and I think it's just, weird random stuff. So I'm actually letting, at this point, I've gotten quite a bit of green beans off of here, and these are a little bit on the oversized side. And so I'm just letting everything mature and go to seed, and I'll collect seed, and then I'll have that for next year. This is more like, that's actually too young, so a little bit too small, but most of these are too large. Yeah, there's a huge guy in there. So I'm just letting these dry at this point, and I'll collect seed. There's a big pile in there. We don't eat a ton of green beans. I like them, but it's not the first vegetable I go for, and so we'll eat a handful of meals with green beans, and then we're kind of done. I usually freeze a bunch too, and I did freeze a bunch with this. And then the other part of this bed, this is a salvia that I started from seed, and I had a hole here. I pulled out a huge borage plant that was here because it was crowding everything out, and I threw the salvia in here. And now, 2 months later, the salvia is crowding everything out, but it's been a really pretty little red salvia, and it hated being in pots. It looked terrible when I had it in pots, and I threw it in here out of desperation just because I needed to get it out of the pot. And it's done quite well. So I have one of these in my front porch, and then one of them out here. Really lovely. And, good for hummingbirds and butterflies. And then I have a few. This is one green onion that's huge, and I really need to pull out, but I haven't bothered. And so that's just a regular green scallion. And then the rest of this bed, these are leeks. And not as big as they should be, simply because there's a lot of competition in there with all the shade and everything else that's going on. But I'll get a few, and they'll be small, and we'll use them up. And then on the far end, that is celery. And those are 4 celery plants. And they are the teeny tiniest seed, and they take forever to come up, and you feel like you're never going to get anything. And then when they start taking off, they really take off. And so I chop and freeze celery, and then I use it all winter in soups and stews. And then we've also been making a green smoothie with apple, kale, parsley, celery, ginger, lemon juice. That's actually surprisingly delightful. I actually have a video on that if you're curious. And so we've been doing fresh green smoothies out of the garden as well, which has been lovely. This on the end here, let me come where you can see the whole arch. This is cucumber on both sides, and I should not have planted as many as I did. I have given, about every week, I give a big bag to the food bank because I just have way too many. My neighbor loves them as well, but they will go from too small to too big in 24 hours. They just are crazy fast. This is a Japanese variety that I really like. It just produces straight through in the summer through the heat, and it also doesn't get bitter. It's not good for pickling, but it's really good for eating. And we've been doing cucumber limeade with these this is like slightly oversized. And you just put a couple of these in a blender with the juice of 3 limes and about 8 cups of water, grind it up, and then add sweetener to taste. And it's a really refreshing, little bit of salt, kind of a Gatorade, homemade Gatorade, but a great way to use up lots of cucumbers. So we've been doing a lot of that, and I've been giving a lot to my neighbor as well. She loves cucumbers, but yeah, way too many. I should not have put 6 plants in there, but they are glorious. And of course, it's hard to not just love this stuff going on. I mean, who doesn't love that? It's like everything you hope for when you put those trellises in. Coming over to this bed, this is peppers, And a little leggy, a little shady, but mostly they've done quite well. On the end here, this is Signet Marigold that is pretty much done, but it's still blooming. So I've got lots of seed. I'm sure this will reseed a bit. But these are edible and just delightful, very fun. And so that's on the end there. And then I've got 6 different sweet peppers that are called Carmen. And I don't have any ripe ones showing right now because I picked them all and we've been eating them. A couple of Korean peppers, a couple of guajillos, which is a Mexican pepper that's quite mild, but when you dry it, it's really, really good as part of a mix for homemade chili powder. And then a couple of shishitos. Here's a shishito here on the end that I really put them in the wrong spot. I should have put them away from the cucumbers because they've gotten an awful lot of shade. So this one has produced some, but the one next to it over here it's really stunted because it's just a little bit too much shade there. But yeah, the peppers have done well. This is a good bed for peppers. And then on the end, the far end, I've got a lot of poblanos. I was supposed to have a couple of jalapenos in here, and evidently my jalapenos were mixed up with my poblanos when I planted the seed. Here's the guajillos. These get quite big. So beautiful, big, long peppers. But you can see the poblanos in there. And I have 4 really big, beautiful ones in my crisper right now in the house. And I'm going to make some homemade chili rellenos, which is one of my favorite treats this time of year. But I am in love with poblanos. They are definitely, I mean, I could not get down to 1 pepper. I would be miserable if I had to choose only one. But if I was doing top 5, poblanos would definitely be top 5. But look at the size of these. These have really done well size-wise this year. Oops, I think that one's coming in with me. I just snapped it off. But good size on these. A lot of times they will be smaller than this, and so very pleased. And then when they get ripe, they turn red. And if you dry this, once it's ripe, it's an ancho. And you always see ancho peppers called for in homemade chili powder, so they're good for that as well. So peppers in this bed, and then turning to my left, this is more peppers. So this is Sugar Rush Peach, and behind it is Aji Amarillo. And so the Sugar Rush, I'll put it on the screen. I can't remember if Sugar Rush is Chinensis or Bactum, but it's not. There's a bunch of different varieties of genus species of chilies. Most of what we grow in this country is Annam, and these are not Annam, and so they have a different growth pattern, and they get ripe at a different rate. But you can see we're starting to get some color in there, and that's what they're ripe. Like that color, that peach color is when they're ripe. But honestly, they are very good even when they're green. In the last couple of years, we've made like end of season hot sauce with these, where we just pull everything off the plant and make a hot sauce. And it is just delicious. It's been one of our favorite hot sauces, even though the peppers weren't even fully ripe. So Sugar Rush Peach has just become kind of a must-grow pepper for me. And then let's see if I can even get in here. I'm going to come around to the other side. Hang on. There we go. All right, so this guy is the Aji Amarillo, and it's gotten very, very tall. I don't remember, I've grown this before, and I don't remember the growth habit being quite this tall, but they're easily 2 feet, 2.5 feet tall. They're very mixed in with the other peppers at this point. But these also take a very long time to turn color, and they also get yellow-orange. And so looking forward to those as well. And I'll put a link to it if I can find it again in the description. There's a really fun potato salad recipe that is out of Peru that is Aji Amarillo, that uses Mexican crema instead of mayonnaise, that I've made a couple of times, and it is really good. It's like, they're not super crazy hot, but definitely got some heat to them, and fabulous, fun, different potato salad. The rest of this bed this was all brassica, and those have all come out with the exception of there's one broccoli over here and a couple of kale that are still in, but I did have, I can't even remember everything that was in here, but there was some cabbage in here for sure. And then I put in 6 okras, and it's too shady. It was the wrong spot for them. I thought I was going to have enough sun, and this is the only one that's doing well. The other 5 are super stunted. But this one, I think I might get a couple of fruit off of it before it succumbs to the weather. There's one little baby one starting right there. I've discovered that I actually really like okra, and I really have a hard time figuring out where to put it. It likes heat, and in the south it'll get 5 feet tall. I've never ever had an okra get that big, so it's a little bit of a hit and miss for me in my climate, but it's fun to give it a try. And then on the edge of this trellis I have peas, and I've planted this a couple of times. These are like a sugar snap type pea, and they are just starting to germinate. And then the one you see there was planted like 3 weeks ago, and I didn't have good germination. I had some old seed, and it was still pretty hot. But if I don't get them in early enough, I get a lot of green, and then I never actually get any peas before it gets too cold. And so it's always a tricky thing to do peas in the fall here, but I have better luck in the fall than the spring. It's a long story, but me and peas, we struggle. Although last year I did have a good crop. This one is snow pea coming along here, and this was actually what inspired me to finally get my camera out and film this, because look at that, you guys. I actually have a snow pea at the beginning of September, so that's pretty exciting. I haven't grown snow peas in years, and this was newer seed, and I got kind of random germination, but the ones on the end have done quite well, and so I'm excited to have some snow peas. And then the rest of this bed, I pulled all the garlic out in early July, and then I direct seeded brassicas. So I have cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, and kale in here as a fall crop. I've got them covered with this very fine mesh because I am trying to keep out both the cabbage moth that lays larvae all over the place and get eaten, and also to fight back the aphids, because I have terrible aphid problems on brassicas this time of year. And so far, it's working pretty well. I'm very pleased with how the size of these, they seem to be doing pretty good. And I put a lot of seed down because I wasn't sure if this was going to work. I've never direct seeded in the fall. I've always started them in pots. And so I had clumps where I had 3 or 4 plants come up, and then I had clumps where nothing came up. And so then I ended up just digging them when they were little and moving them around, and that seemed to have worked. So extra fun. This is celery from last year that I cut to the ground, and then it amazingly overwintered, and so it has gone to seed. And like a month and a half ago, if you stood here with a camera, everything was moving. Like there were so many little small insects, native pollinators, and tiny little bees and tiny little flies and all kinds of things were in here. So anything in the parsley family, which celery is, very, very popular with pollinators. And so this was really fun to see. But at this point, it's almost ready to harvest. And so my plan is to make a celery salt with celery seed. And let me see if I can, so hopefully you guys can see that. But there's actual seed in there. And so it's very fine, but we definitely have some seed. And so that was the whole idea for letting this go, was to basically get another load of celery seed so that I could make celery salt, because that's something that I sell every year. And so that was fun. I've done it with cutting celery, which is a different variety of celery that is used more like an herb, but I've never actually done it with a celery plant because I've never had it over winter before, so that was fun. On the end here, look at this gorgeous baby. This was the other reason that I got the camera out. I mean, look at that. So this is an echinacea, and I have 2 different varieties. One of them is cayenne, and one of them is just a mixed, like a rainbow mixed echinacea, and so I don't know which one this came from. I'm assuming cayenne, but I'm just so pleased with this. 1, that it bloomed in the first year, because a lot of times they don't bloom the first year. And 2, it's so pretty. So yeah, I'm just very tickled with that. And then in this pot here, I have rose, I'll put the name on the screen, some kind of salvia, that's what this is. And then this is more of the Sahara Rudbeckia, but not as happy because it got a little stifled. And then there were some other volunteers in there that have since aged out. But we're doing okay. And then on the very end here, hopefully you can see that through. I'm not going to bother taking the thing up. Those are kale, and I need to thin them out. But I've got some nice kale in there as well. Interesting volunteers this year. I've definitely had... I had a lot of herbs in here a couple of years ago, and I expected some things to volunteer and reseed, and it didn't. And then this year, things that didn't come up last year came up this year. So this is toothache plant, and it's just starting to bloom. And so I didn't realize what this was. I just had been kind of ignoring it. But this is in the aisle, and I had a ton of toothache plant in this bed 2 years ago, and the seed evidently has finally decided to germinate. And then the other thing I have behind me, you can kind of see it through there, is some holy basil. And that volunteered from 2 years ago as well, because I didn't grow any of that in these beds last year. And then I had a lot of chamomile that came up from stuff I had in here from 2 years ago. So go figure. It doesn't make any sense to me, but it's lovely. I'll take it. You may notice I have in random beds this stuff that looks a little bit like 4-leaf clover or 3-leaf clover. This is wood sorrel, and it came in on a nursery pot many, many years ago. It's edible, and it's just everywhere at this point. And so when it's dry, no, not quite ready. When this stuff is really dry and the seed pods, which you can see here, when the seed pods are dry, you brush your hand against it and they actually break open and explode. And that is why it is so hard to get rid of, because it just reseeds itself everywhere. And so I have it in all of my beds, and I selectively, in fact, you can see there's some of it right there underneath that. So I selectively pull it out, but it doesn't hurt anything. And so mostly I just ignore it, but try not to let it get too far ahead. This is a thyme plant that I started from a cutting and threw in here. And then I gave this a big old haircut about a month and a half ago. And then this is the regrowth on that. So lots of good thyme to harvest in there. You know, part of gardening is just plugging things into holes when you've got weird things. But it's just fun to see how much this garden has changed from early May. You could go back and watch the May garden tour and you'd be amazed at how different it is. This bed is beets and carrots. And then I did have a little bit of garlic through here that when that got harvested, I had planted before that this snapdragon that I got seed for this year. I'll put the name on the screen. I can't remember it right now. Rembrandt, I think. And it's more of a bedding snapdragon. It's not a cutting snapdragon. It doesn't get super tall, but it's really pretty. And it germinated super well. And so I had a lot of it in pots. And so I just kind of tucked it in all over the place. Hello there. And I've been pleased with this. It's pretty much been blooming for about 2 months. So that's been fun. And it was a good thing to just stick in around that garlic that I knew was going to come out. These are extra cabbage that I had a lot of cabbage germinate. And so these got transferred over into this bed. And so I've got 3 cabbages in here that aren't covered. But so far they seem to be doing pretty good. I'm not seeing a ton of damage. And so we'll see how those do. And then these beets, I've harvested a few. There's 2 different successions of sowing in there. But you can see they're coming. They're pretty good. And this lighter colored one, this is, sorry, got a leaf in the way. That's Chioggia, which is the one that looks like a target when you cut it in half. And for whatever reason, Chioggia just does super, super well in my climate. Like I always have great germination. These Chioggia seeds are old. They're not new. Versus like a bull's blood or the deep red beet, which is what this one is. And I had less, I think I had about even germination, and this is more recent seed. But Chioggia just does super well in my climate. I'm not sure why. The carrots are doing good. I'm just starting to get big enough that I could actually harvest carrots. I like to leave these in the ground until we get a frost because it makes them so much sweeter. But I've also been eating a lot of hummus and red peppers and carrots, and so I have pulled a couple of them out for that. And then this is the random parsley that was supposed to be a celery, but I recognized as it was getting bigger, I don't think that's a celery, I think it's a parsley, and so that just got stuffed into a hole because that's how that stuff goes. So this kale, this is a type of Russian blue kale, and this is what happens with my kale. And I fight this all summer, and then eventually I just kind of give up. So this curled leaf that you're seeing here, this is aphids. So aphids get in there, and you can do a really hard stream of water and wash them off, but it's very hard to get in there with water because of the way they're curled, because the plant kind of curls around itself, and so that can be difficult. There was a really big plant here, and it's got some side shoots that I'm letting go, but this I just chopped off, took it in the house and processed it and froze it. This is a type of lacinato kale, so more of the dinosaur kale, and for whatever reason, I'm not having nearly the aphid issues. There is some, you can see on the back of this leaf in here, there's some aphids in there. But for the most part, this has been way less aphidy and way less chewed on in general. I don't know why, but you can see we have eaten almost every leaf that was down here in smoothies and things. So we've gotten a lot of production out of this. I think I've eaten more kale this year than I've eaten in my whole life. Nothing like cancer to motivate you to eat more kale. But it's been delightful. We've had a really nice harvest. And I love this kind of blue-purple veining that goes on in here. This was, I think, a random seed pack from a seed swap, but I'll figure out what it is. I think it was from Baker Creek, and I'll put the name up because it's done quite well for me. Here's our last broccoli. We picked the big original middle heads, and then they always get side shoots. I think this is Arcadia. I'm not sure, but eventually the side shoots start getting small, and they start getting where they start spreading out really quickly. And so the other one was done. This one, I'm going to get one more small harvest off of it. But you start getting like this, where this is like curled over and weird. So that's a sign that we're about done. But I've been picking old leaves off of it and trying to see how that's starting to open up. I should have picked that a couple of days ago. But some nice broccoli harvest, and broccoli is one of those things that, whereas I won't necessarily look to eat green beans a couple of nights a week, I will definitely eat broccoli a couple of nights a week. I've always loved broccoli. So there's a nice little side shoot in there. So, and I took the other plant that was in here that was about this size out, hacked it down and threw it over the fence, and the chickens cleaned it to where it looked like a skeleton. So they were definitely hungry for some brassica. That was kind of awesome. Oh, I was going to show you these on the end of this pea bed. I did buy a couple of jalapenos since I didn't actually grow any jalapenos for myself. And these have done super well. This is just a random big box store jalapeno, but they're not getting a lot of competition, even though it's a little bit shady in here. And so I've got some really nice peppers in here. And I'm trying to decide, we've been throwing them in salsa and stuff, but I'm trying to decide what I want to do. If I want to pickle the rest. And I do have a salsa recipe that really is, it looks like it's avocado, but it's not. And it's the salsa is at one of my favorite little Mexican taquerias. And I think I finally found a recipe for it. So I'm probably going to try a batch of that. It's basically just an emulsion of jalapenos and oil. And it is so good I could drink it out of a shot glass. So yeah, so probably going to do a little bit of that. But nice little jalapeno crop coming in here. Yeah, this is such an interesting mix of summer and fall coming through. And then last but not least, this is the tomatoes. And I have a total of 8 plants in this 4x8 bed, and it's too many. And I knew it was too many when I did it, and I did it anyway. And so I've come in here and whacked at this and whacked at this, trying to knock it back a little bit. On the ends, on this end, I have cherry tomatoes. And so this is Principice Borghese, and stay tuned for a video on drying these and then packing them in oil that I'll show you. That's coming up. And then the other one that is not over here but is over here because it's climbed over here, this is just a Sun Gold. So lots of good little cherry tomatoes. Sun Golds are maddening because they split super easy. but they are the best tasting cherry tomato. But yeah, Sun Gold is planted right here. There's a Brandywine buried in there. There's a paste tomato buried in here. And then on the end is a Dr. Wychees. Notice where the Sun Golds are. So they have climbed all the way through this bed. So I've tried to get in there and pull some of that out because they're just monsters. And it's been very difficult to control them. So I'm kind of losing the war, but I have picked out a lot. The Dr. Wychees have done amazingly well. I think of, oops, sorry, hello spider. I think of all the bigger tomatoes that are in here, this is what I've gotten the most harvest off of. And you can see there's another one coming in that's green. I have a San Marzano, and there aren't any ripe ones on here right now, but I did get a nice harvest of San Marzano and also Blue Beach, which is another paste tomato. And we canned a batch of salsa. I'll put a link to that recipe below if you want a zesty salsa. And then I also just canned 4 quarts of regular tomatoes for use. So I've gotten a surprisingly good amount of harvest out of here for what we had and how shady this is and how completely insanely overgrown it is. This is tied up. I did a bit of a Florida weave in here. So we've got T-posts on the end, and then I've got rope weaving through these plants, but you can see like this should be all the way up here, and it's all the way down here just from the weight of all the vines on everything. So yeah, I lost the battle for sure, but a reasonable harvest for when I did not want to spend a lot of time this year on futzing around with tomatoes, and I knew I wasn't planning on canning hardly any. And so yeah, we've been okay. So that's the garden. This year, I've torn out a lot of stuff over different places, things that have volunteered that I was just done with. So there was a big California poppy that I ripped out there. And then this whole area was calendula, volunteer calendula. And I tore all of that out because I really needed to be able to actually access this bed. And it got to the point where I couldn't get through here. There is a horseradish that is right here in this aisle that I don't want it to be here, but a gopher planted it years ago, and no matter how much we dig it, it just keeps coming up. And so we did just recently dig that out again as well so that I could get through here. So yeah, it's been an interesting process of trying to tear things out so that I could walk through in different areas. But I'm pleased with the garden harvest that we've gotten this year. It's been rewarding. The flowers have been incredible and have just made my heart so glad. This variety of marigold, I'll put the name on the screen. What's amazing about it is even though I don't get in here and deadhead as much as I should, it just keeps blooming. So it like, even though it's got spent flowers on it, it just keeps getting taller and it keeps blooming. And this has been blooming probably since early May. So amazing marigold. I'm very, very pleased with that, and it's just super gorgeous. So that is the late summer garden. I'll probably do one more update in early to mid-October to bring you up to date on how some of those brassicas are doing and whether or not we successfully managed to get cauliflower and cabbage and broccoli and more peas. But yeah, it's been a good year, and especially considering everything else that's happened, I have no complaints. No notes, as my husband says. Secret squash patch. Secret melon patch. I've got zucchini, melons, butternut, delicata, and pumpkins out here. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment or share. I have new content coming out whenever I have time.